I'd like to extend a personal welcome to all of you and express both my gratitude and pleasure that you've decided to join us here this evening. For those of you who have attended previous parenting talks, you have undoubtedly noticed that we have a different format. In the past, our sessions were more of a straightforward lecture style with a single presenter, followed by questions from the audience at the end. What we're aiming for this season is to make the sessions a bit more interactive, as well as to connect the research and science to sort of the everyday life of parenting and child rearing. Towards that end, tonight's session includes both a medical doctor who specializes in autism, as well as a parent who has a child with autism. And so for the next 50 or 60 minutes, three of us will engage in a conversation about autism. And following that, we'll open up the floor for discussion, questions. So I have here with me Dr. Ahmed, who is the head of child and adolescent psychiatry at Sheikh Khalifa Medical City here in Abu Dhabi. Dr. Ahmed is also an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Yale University School of Medicine in the United States. He holds a medical degree from King Faisal University in Saudi Arabia. He also holds a diploma in child health from the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Dublin, Ireland. And he completed a residency in child psychiatry and research at Yale University. Apart from having published widely in medical journals, Dr. Ahmed also chairs the examination committee of the Arab Board of Child Psychiatry. I'd also like to introduce Anan Abdelhamid, who's the mother of Muhammad, a 10-year-old boy who has autism. Muhammad receives services at Sheikh Khalifa Medical City, and Dr. Ahmed is one of his physicians. So you may be wondering why we have chosen this particular topic, autism symptoms and early signs. Well, as is true for all of our topics, it was chosen because previous audiences have requested it. And so while it's a medical condition that's familiar to many, it's understood by few. People are aware that autism is a developmental disorder. Another objective we have is to simply make you more aware of autism, its prevalence, and what it looks like. We have several video clips to supplement our discussion, and we'll get Muhammad's firsthand account of her experiences. So to repeat our goals, I don't know, who has the clicker?
Is it this one here? There you go.
Okay, thank you. So to repeat our goals, one is to raise awareness about autism spectrum disorders. So what does that mean? We haven't used that term yet. Autism spectrum disorders and autism are both general terms for a group of complex disorders of brain development. These disorders are characterized in varying degrees by difficulties in social interaction, verbal and nonverbal communication, and repetitive behaviors. And we will review all of that in detail as the session proceeds. Autism appears to have its roots in early brain development. And while there are differences of opinion regarding the causes of autism and the best ways to treat it, one fact that experts tend to agree on is that early and intensive intervention helps. So now I'd like to turn to Dr. Ahmed to talk to us about the developmental perspective of autism. But before I turn to him, I want to mention that we will be showing you video clips this evening. Please be aware that none of the children in the video clips are the son of Muhammad. The children in the video clips are other clients of Dr. Ahmed. Muhammad is not in these videos, nor is he here with us this evening. So.
Okay. Here we go. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. And thank you very much, Jana, for the kind introduction. Thank you for the invitation. I will be speaking as a child psychiatrist. We tend to talk about a lot of pathology, symptoms and signs, and all the sort of grim picture of autism. Now, tonight, I'm going to take a different route. I'm going to take a different direction. We'll try to make it simple. We're going to talk about the autism spectrum from a developmental perspective. So, and hopefully I'll try to, I've been told not to be too technical, so I'll do my best to do that. It's not easy for someone like me to do that, let me tell you that. But but we'll try that. So we'll start with a video that we want to start, and then we'll start out with this discussion. So should I just put it forward? Okay. Some assistance with that. Can we do that from here, or does someone else do it? Oh, okay, here we go. So thank you. We can't really tell there's something wrong. Now, I will talk a little bit about, and I guess there'll be some discussion, but we're talking about autism spectrum here. And autism spectrum is always an interesting subtopic. Everywhere you go, people will take interest in autism for a number of reasons. International media does that. Local media does that as well. This is newspapers, local newspapers here in the Emirates. Why are we doing that? Well, because we're starting to see so many children who are on the spectrum. We've seen too many children with the autism spectrum disorder. And at the time when I was in training, a long time ago, we used to think that the prevalence of autism, there is 1 in every 1,200 children meets criteria for autism, right? But we're talking about studies now that 1 in 80 children will be diagnosed as being autistic. And some recent studies is even much more than that. So we're looking at prevalence rate is more than 1%, 1 to 1.5%. So there's a lot of these children who are affected by this disorder. To put that in perspective, and autism is part of what we call developmental disorder, and that includes many disorders, including autism, mental disability, or in other words, mental retardation, children who have some other learning disabilities, behavioral issues like ADHD, autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Collectively, we call these developmental disorder. Now, if you look at children in general, there's about 17% of all of these children will have some kind of developmental disability. And like I said, this developmental disability could be something as simple as having delayed language. Some have much more serious disorder like autism spectrum disorder. Another thing, one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of these children that develop at their own pace. And I don't want people to go around thinking, okay, this child, there's something odd about this child's behavior, and there's something wrong. Because a lot of what we see as talk more about this, we'll find out that these children actually have their own, they develop at their own pace. They might have some delays at one point, but they catch up and they do well on time. Like I said, not every child who has a delay in language or social, whatever, has a problem. And there's many factors involved. But it is important to recognize what are the signs of the problems, and we'll come back to talk about this. Symptoms sometimes could be very confusing. What you see in autistic children with autistic spectrum, you can see in normal children. Well, how can we tell then? Well, there are certain signs and symptoms that we look at. We have to look at the whole picture. That's one way to look at it. Having a child, for instance, children who have autism spectrum, many of them have delayed language skills. Now, does that mean every child who have delayed language skills have autism? The answer is no. And I've seen many children in my clinic that come to me referred for evaluation of autism spectrum because they were suspected of having autism because they have delayed language. Okay? There are some more severe forms of language. They're called a mixed language disorder, which means they have problem with expressing, and receptive, which is they have problem with understanding the language. And it can be so severe as a result of that, they might have social delays and some other problems in communication that sometimes autism is suspected as a result of that. So they come to me, and I'm always happy to deliver the good news. Your child is actually not autistic. And the parents are very happy to hear that. The problem is sometimes when we see some of these autistic children, they go to the doctors, and the doctors will say, there's nothing wrong with your child. He's fine. You know, he will speak later. But they could be sitting there flapping and doing all of the other stereotypies, what we call them. And some of the doctors may not have that experience, may tell the parents, your child is fine, while the child have much more serious problems. And that's a problem by itself. And on the other hand, you have doctors who will tell the parents that your child have much more serious problem, where it may not be. So going to the right specialist is really important, so where you can get a good advice. All right. Some of the behaviors I was just talking about that we see in normal children that sometimes we suspect of what we see in autistic children. For instance, children who during play, they will spin, they go around in circles. Now, this is a very common behavior we see in autism spectrum disorders children. Now, does that mean they're autistic? No. We have to look at the picture. We have to look at too many things before we get to that point. Toe walking. Anyone here seen children toe walking their toes? Yeah, we see that. Now, all these children have autism? Very few. It's very common to see children who do this toe walking, but it is very common to see that in children who are autistic. But does every child who does that necessarily have autistic disorder? No. The answer is no. There's a lot of children who don't like certain things, annoyed by certain things like sounds, lights, which is, again, something we see with autistic children. But that by itself is not an indication that a child has autism. Certain children are sensitive, like I said, to certain textures. The shirt tags, texture of the clothes, texture of food. We know many of the autistic children are very picky. They like food with certain texture, certain taste, certain consistency. But, you know, how many of the audience here have children who are picky, fussy eaters? Have you had children who are picky, will eat certain foods? Yeah. A lot of food. My kids, when they were young, they were very picky eaters. For instance, I see a lot of children who would only eat fast food, and the parents are struggling with them there to try to, you know, feed them some healthy food, and they won't eat it, but they will only eat certain, I don't know, burgers and some of the healthy stuff. The point is, many symptoms that we see and we consider as autistic symptoms may be simply a normal behavior for some children that it might be transient, it might take a little while and disappear. So let's not jump to judgment here. This is a study we've done at the Child Psychiatry Department at Sheikh Khalifa Medical City, and we are looking here looked at the percentage, and this will give you an idea about, let me see here, here it is. What percentage of children? Of course, the majority, this is the percentage in 1 month. This was back in 2012 in March. And we looked at the different percentages of children who attend our clinic, and we looked at what kind of diagnostic category they belong to. And of course here, ADHD. Everybody knows ADHD, right? That's the most common psychiatric or behavioral disorder we see in children. That constitutes, so ADHD behavioral problems constitute about 49% of the children we see. Then this is followed by anxiety disorders, which are very common in children. It is common in adults as well. Now, autistic children, we are a center for referral. And does this represent normal population? No, the answer is not. So this is a skewed population, and many of the children who come to see us belong to certain categories. So about 8% of them are in the autistic spectrum disorder. Then we see children with other disorders, depression, genetic disorders. The other thing that I want to point out here, which are language disorders, which is very common here. And this is, you know, in 21 years practice in the US, I don't think I've seen many children who have problems with language as I've seen here. And the next slide will illustrate the point here. So I've done this over 1 year in 2012 again, but this is, we looked at statistics, our statistics over 1 year. And ASD, autism spectrum disorder here, constitutes about 13% of the children we see at the clinic. ADHD remains the highest percentage, and you will see that in any practice, okay? Now, here we are with the 14% children who have problems with language. So this problem with language, what we call, there's two types of language that we call speech. When we call this speech, it means they might have problem with the way how they pronounce letters, words, but language is something to do with the brain. So it's their use of the language, how they use the different words to make sentences, and that we call that language. Now, we see a lot of children here with language delay and speech problems. What does it have? There's a lot of factors. There's a large immigrant population. There's a lot of house help that don't necessarily speak the language the family speak, whether it's Arabic, and as a result, these children have to learn the language somewhere, and they're not exposed to the language that the family speaks, or they probably, when they go to daycare, speaks. As a result of that, they will have language delays now. And this constitutes a lot of children who get referred because they think these children have autism. But the good news is most of the time, these children do not have autism, but they have problems with language, and that's easier to fix, thank God. Now, looking here, we're looking at autism, and when we say autism has many faces, and there's many problems. Autism, not just a child who spins and flaps, because they have many other problems as well, right? So these children, some of them have many medical problems, like the seizures. They have stomach, GI problem, gastrointestinal, in addition to the main categories. This is the main three categories they have problems with. Repetitive, stereotypic behaviors, so the flapping, the spinning, the certain out behaviors that they have. This is what we call stereotypies. And then we have what we call the self-stimulating behaviors. So that's part of it. They self-stimulate. And then they have problems with communication and language, which is part of it. And then the social delays. Can everyone hear me? And then we have problems with sleep. We have problems with sensory integration. There's something about their senses that some of these children have that is not quite normal. For instance, a lot of these children are sensitive to certain loud noises. And if you've seen some of these autistic children, when they have, there's some loud noise around them, they'll cover their ears, okay? Some of these children are insensitive to pain. And I'll mention, this is a little bit too strong and maybe a little bit graphic, but I'll give an example of, I think it was a 2.5-year-old child who came to the clinic, and his mother was doing the papers to register the child at the clinic, and he was autistic. and he was trying everything to get his mother's attention, and she was busy. So what he did, he bit himself, and he took a chunk out of his arm, and that didn't faze him. Everyone around him was shocked. You know, that was very traumatic to a lot of people. Well, he did not feel the pain. He was insensitive to pain. And he looked around. Anyone watching? Looked at his mother. She didn't realize what he's done. And of course, she was shocked when she saw that. But a lot of not a lot, some of these children are simply have problems with sensations, so they don't feel the pain. They're sensitive to loud sounds. They're sensitive to, you know, clothes textures, shirt tags, and things like that. So that is part of the problem here. And then self-injurious behaviors, which many of you know, and many of them have problems with delayed mental retardation and the problems with immune system. Okay, so let me go back here. Let me see if I can play this. No.
How did we play it before?
Do they have to? There we go. I think we can dim the lights a little bit so people can see the video a little bit better. This is, I believe, was a 6-year-old. Hold a second. Okay, so I'm sorry the child, but this speaks to some of the symptoms we were just talking about, the flapping, a cute little child, but all the behaviors we've seen, some of you have seen autistic children, this is very common. And the flapping, the self-stimulating behaviors, constantly walking aimlessly, really not making much of a social contact here with the mother who is sitting there. The connection is poor. And this is very common in many of these children. But that can change. This is another study which we looked at, and we have in the صحة a wonderful electronic health record. And with this electronic health record, I can say to the IT department, can you pull for me 5,000 cases of autism or ADHD or whatever? And they put through the system numbers and they come up with figures. And what we did in this study, so this particular study was a study for ADHD, and this came from 12 صحة hospitals. And what I asked them is, please look at all the cases between, I believe, in these 12 hospitals, and I think it was done between 2008 and 2012, so over 4 years. And I said, look up all the cases of ADHD, and we came up with 1,301 cases here. And I wanted to see what the coexisting conditions that we call comorbidities that these children have. And we came up with many things. So some of them is the ADHD here, and then the language delay again comes up. Many of these, 33% of our sample had language delay. But what I wanted to show, a lot of these children are on the autistic spectrum. And they have many other problems as well, behavioral, otherwise. But all of these studies show, this just show you how common the disorder is. We see a lot of these children. Now, moving along and to some myths about the autism. And is it clear so far? Okay. All right. So just a few things that people took for granted what they thought about children who have autism. Some of them are correct, some of them are misconceptions. And some of the misconceptions are that these children don't make eye contact. Now, if you looked at that child, the video we just saw a minute ago, the child was going back to the mother, although the connection wasn't there, but they do make eye contact. And when they get used to a certain care provider, they do establish that connection. And they look at them, and they can you can feel the connection between the two. So not all autistic children don't actually make eye contact, although that's very common. The other thing is that, let's say inside every child with autism is a normal child or genius waiting to emerge. The fact is, we looked at that, more than 50 or 60% of children with autism spectrum disorder have mental retardation. There's a small percentage, then we'll come back to that, who have normal IQ. Some of them might have higher IQ. They don't speak, but they could if they want to. People think they can if they push them, if they scream at them that they'll come out and speak. Well, the fact is no. And like I mentioned earlier, speech has two processes. One of them is you have to be able to understand what people tell you, and that's how children learn. So if you put a child in an environment where like we see these days, they're watching TV, they're playing with the iPad, they're playing with the cell phone, the mobile phone, and they have no way of learning the language, they will have a delayed language. And this is the most common problem we see in the clinic, that these children have no one around them to learn language from. Some of them don't go to daycare, they have no other children to learn from, and they have all these smart devices, and they have a delayed language as a result, okay? And the other thing is the children who don't speak, but they could if they want to. So it is a problem. That's not the case. So that's learning the language, which is the receptive part. Then the other part is the expressive. So there's two ways, and some of these children have the mixed language disorder, and we see that very commonly in autistic children. Children who with autism, they don't relate to peers, adults, and they don't want any friends. Well, the fact is, we do see a lot of the children on the autistic spectrum who want that contact. They just don't know how to make that communication. So we're talking especially about the higher functioning autistic children, okay? Children tend to be manipulative and selfish. Now, they don't understand the social gestures. They don't know what it means. So if you give them something, you reciprocate, you say good morning, they're supposed to say good morning back to you. They take things that doesn't belong to them, and they assume that they understand, but they don't. So don't always assume. Everything we do for granted, we learn through our social learning, that these children don't learn that necessarily. They have an emotional disorder. Yes, it can be to a certain extent. They can be, and the last thing is, a lot of people think that autism, once you have autism, and I say this to a lot of families, it's a diagnosis you have for life. Well, does that mean you always have the same behaviors and symptoms? No. A lot of children do get better. They can learn language. They can learn social behavior. They can learn a lot of things. For instance, I'll mention this as an example. Children who are autistic, they don't make eye contact, right? We see that a lot. But children who go through behavior treatment, they learn that. Over time, they learn when you speak to someone, you make eye contact, right? Well, they learn it, and they practice it a lot, to the point where they do it automatically. Now, me as a professional, I can tell which child, for instance, have that as a learned behavior as opposed to a natural, spontaneous behavior, okay? Now, for instance, I would look at the child, and these children usually have learned over the years. They start to talk, and then they realize, oh, I'm supposed to look and make... So it takes them probably a couple of seconds to realize they're not looking at the person. They talk into, and they do it. Now, in that couple of seconds, sort of gives me a clue that this is a learned behavior as opposed to, natural behavior. In a child with the following, what would be the warning signs to look at these children? And there's a few to look at. They don't necessarily mean this child is autistic, but if you see some of these signs, you should worry. You should have that child be evaluated. And some of these would be, if the child by age 12 months, they know babbling, ga, 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 ga. The children, they're born from the first month. They make that noise, they make that sound when they interact, they play, they smile. And if by age 12 months, and this is why these days we can diagnose these autistic children from a very young age, okay? Now, if they do that, now there's no gesturing, there's no waving, no bye-bye. It's the little children, you've seen your little child, even at age, at age 1 month, a child can look at the adults, they can make that eye contact. They can smile. By age 6, 8 months, they recognize people they're familiar with, their mother, family members, and they start to be scared. They have what we call stranger anxiety. So they have all of these before they even, reach age 10 months. So all of these are important signs that we should see in these children. And if they they don't exhibit these behaviors, if they don't point out, these are some of the warning signs. By age 16 months, if they still can't speak a single word, that's a very serious problem. That doesn't necessarily mean it's autistic, but they might have a language delay, but something need to look at. Now, by age 2, they should be able to make 2-word sentences, okay? 2-word sentences, they should be able to do that. If they can't, and it can be echolalia. Echolalia means repeating words. They could be their own, or it could be someone else's words. So it can be, and if they do that, sometimes children do that. It doesn't necessarily mean they're autistic, but we have to pay attention to these things. Loss of language, and this is probably the most important one. A lot of children, although have the genes for autism, but do they exhibit the signs and symptoms at birth? Not necessarily. Most of the children we see, they start to exhibit these symptoms and behavior by age 18 months, okay? 1.5 years to 2, and they start to regress. And when I hear that, that makes me really worried when I see that. So children have learned social skills, they've learned some language, and they started to deteriorate at age 18 months or 24 months. That's very serious.
Before you go on. So, Dr. Ahmed, I want to just interject for a
Sure.
minute. You've provided a really nice overview of autism as one of the many types of developmental disorders that young children might demonstrate. And I want to thank you for saying a few words about the myths and misunderstandings people have about autism. I'm sure that several people in the audience have other myths and misunderstandings they may want to address to us, which they can do a little bit later during the session. For now, I want to focus a bit on if we go back to the next slide, on the early warning signs, which are ever so critical, as you know, and which can easily be misunderstood or overlooked. And we know, this is in part because children develop at different rates. But clearly there are times or ages at which a child should be demonstrating certain behaviors, and those are the ones that you've identified here. I want to turn to Muhammad just for a minute to ask if she would tell us about Muhammad's development in his early years. Just to provide the audience a little bit of background, Muhammad is 10 years old, and he's the youngest of 4 children. His 3 older siblings are typically developing, and in fact, they excel academically and they have high social skills. 2 of his siblings are in college, and 1 is in high school. Because Muhammad has 3 older children, she was aware of normal development and what it looked like. And in her opinion, Muhammad was developing normally, for the first 12 months or so, maybe 15 months. And then she began to notice some changes. And so, he was babbling and he had some single words by 15 months. He could say mama and baba and he knew who they were. And then that started to change. And so he's an example of a child that Dr. Ahmad mentioned who fits that last point, which is he started losing language and social skills. she noticed when he was, close to 2 years old. So the question I have for you, Muhammad, is, when he was about 2 years old, you began to notice his development has changed. It was different from other children, both your older children as well as other children that you knew about. Can you describe some of the behaviors you noticed in him?
محمد بدأ طفل طبيعي في سن كطفل لغاية السنة ونص عادي، كان عنده كلمات معينة بيقولها كأخوانه، ولكن بعد تم السنتين أنا حسيت إنه الحصيلة اللغوية عنده ما زادت، وظهرت عليه فرط الحركة شديد جدا، وما كان بيأشر زي ما الفترة زي ما أنا ربيت أخوانه الكبار، فكان مختلف جدا. وبالإضافة إلى كده ما زادت الحصيلة اللغوية حقته خالص مقارنة بأخوانه، فانتابني للقلق. بعد ذاك ابتديت أسأل وأعرف، وكل من سألت عنه من رفقي أو من القريبين مني فكانوا بدوني إجابات صراحة، بالأساس إنهم يطمنوني وكده، إنه فلان يتكلم بعد 6 سنوات وكده بعد 4 سنوات. ففي النهاية واحدة من صديقاتي فقالت لي أفضل ليكي تمشي مستشفى خليفة، وهو متكامل جدا في استشاريين بوضحوا لك حالة محمد إذا كان طبيعية أو أي ناحية. فالحمد لله مشيت السنتين الأوائل على مستشفى خليفة. فكان أول حاجة إنه أخذ المخاطبة في جناح العلوم المهارات، والثاني مشينا للعلوم السلوكية الطب النفسي، فكان فيه تقييم لمحمد وفيه دعمي كثير جدا لمحمد. وبرضو كان العلاج الوظيفي، لأنه برضو بيمشي على مشاط رجلينه، فتلقى هناك. وكان استشاريين إنهم قالوا لي لازم يدمج في مركز عشان يتطور أكتر، فالحمد لله دمج محمد.
When was the first time you realized there's a problem with the translation? And when did you realize that this is a problem? It speaks maybe to our point here. When did you think, okay, there's something wrong here with Muhammad and I have to take someone to see him?
بعد بلغ محمد 2 و8 شهور بالضبط، لأنه حسيت إنه الإجابات اللي كان بيحطوني لها الأقارب وكده ما أفادت بشيء فلازم يمشي أخصائيين استشاريين عشان يقدروا يوصفوا حالة محمد هل هو.
What was the problem that was most worrisome to you? What was alarming about the problem that caused you to think, okay, there's something wrong here?
إنه المخاطبة الكلمات بتاعته ما زالت متطورة لغويا، بالإضافة فرط الحركة، لا كان يشير ولا كان في تواصل بيني وبينه، ولما نتحدث معه مقارنة بأخوانه الكبار فما كان متواصل معي. كان أنا بتكلم مع شخص مع طفل آخر، محمد ده ما زي أخوانه اللي أنا ربيته.
Okay. Wonderful.
I think one good lesson here, as we can move on, is for parents to really trust their own judgment. I mean, she noticed that something wasn't quite right, and she mentioned it to people, and everyone was, I think, as you pointed out, trying to make you feel good. Oh, he's fine, don't worry, he'll outgrow it. And the truth is he may have outgrown it. As we've mentioned, as Dr. Ahmad has mentioned, every indicator doesn't mean that a child, every problem doesn't, or delay doesn't mean that there's a problem. And so I think one message is for parents to trust your own judgment. If you think something isn't quite right, to really seek that professional advice. But I want to move on so that Dr. Ahmad can talk a bit more about the basics of autism,
Okay.
and some of the treatments, et cetera.
We learned a few things about what could be normal, what could be not normal, what should you worry about. But let's talk here about some of the, what we call the basics of the autism disorder. Number one, that would be that a lot of these symptoms start in the first 3 years of life, okay? Some of them might not start until age 18 months or 2 years, but they do eventually start by age 3. Very few mild cases may not be diagnosed until later, but many of the symptoms can be present. The parents or families or friends may not suspect it, but it is there. This is a lifelong condition. There's no magic pill that children can take and fix it. There's a lot of good treatments that are available to make these children a lot better. Boys are affected much more often than girls, okay? Ratio 4:1. A lot of times there is some kind of underlying neurological disorder with these children. Many of them have seizures like we've seen. Many of them have other neurological disorders, and I'll come back to talk about specifics maybe in some other at the end. There is some genetic factors. Some of these children, there's many factors that can cause autism, okay? Some of them have to do with environment, pregnancy, delivery, and some of them have to do with genetics, and some have to do with environmental toxins, okay? In some instances, there is no obvious reason that is causing the disorder, and the child looks perfectly normal. And the risk, and I hear this a lot, if you have a child with autism spectrum, you have about 3 to 6% risk to have another child with autism. 3 to 6% is not a lot, okay? It's not much. But in twins, it's much higher. It's almost 60%. So if you have one twin who have the disorder, there's about 60% chance that the twin will have it. What does that tell us? It is genetic. It is an inherited disorder. Genes have a lot to do with it. And then the last point I want to make here is that autism is a spectrum. So in very mild cases, they have very mild symptoms, and they may go for years without being diagnosed. In some other cases, it's severe, where they have children with severe mental retardation who flap all day and night, who engage in self-injurious behaviors, hit themselves, hit others, hyperactive, like Muhammad here, who's very active. And Muhammad noticed that from a very early age. Communication, they have a lot of problems. One of the basic problems they have is ability to communicate. And when we talk about communication, there's different ways to communicate. One of them is verbal through the use of language, and some of them nonverbal. For instance, if you're angry, you show it in your face. You're happy, you smile, there's a big smile in your face. Now, we all understand how that works, and we see the expression on someone's face, we know they're happy if they're smiling. They show that grin on their face, they're angry. Now, autistic children do not know how to read faces. They don't understand it, okay? And many of them get in trouble with fights and they can't save themselves because someone else is angry with them and they just can't understand what's going on. When they do communicate, they have limited goals of communication. And they do have stereotypical behavior, so we talked about that. Example, echolalia, we've seen the self-stimulating behavior, the flapping, the spinning, and all of the others. And then, the use of language, body gestures, all of that, we do use, this is nonverbal communication, okay? We use our bodies to communicate with other people. And we learn it as we grow. Now, these children do not learn that, and it's very hard, and they have to learn it concretely, okay? All right. Did I miss the video? All right. This will be an example of how autistic children on the spectrum can communicate. Okay. So we've seen this child, and this is the communication skills. To him, that is communication. Now, and interesting enough, some of the parents do understand this language. Now, most of us don't.
His mother was trying to get him to sit down.
Exactly. So, well, he can get that message. But there are ways. It's interesting to see how sometimes parents with and children can communicate in a language that we don't understand, and they do have ways to do that. There are, you know, when we see young children, there's certain expectation when you watch a child playing what you would expect, okay? So they do have what we call exploratory play. It's present, but it's often atypical. I'll give you an example. They might be interested in odd things. A child who walks into my office, by the way, a lot of the videos you've just seen are taken in my office at Sheikh Khalifa, okay? So there's a lot of toys, there's a lot of colors, there's a dollhouse, there's a lot of things you can see which attracts your attention. First thing you walk in, you see a big dollhouse with colors. And to most people, that will be the first thing that will attract your attention, right? Now, you see with an autistic child, what do? They might walk in and they go directly to the drawers that we have on the side to play with the knobs, okay? They might go into the plugs, odd things. So they leave everything, the obvious things, the colors, the dollhouse, and they'd be interested in this. And that's their way of exploration, but that's the only thing that interests them, okay? They're functional. They may be spared atypical functions. So they do behaviors. For instance, they play, but they play in odd ways with the toys. If you see them, they might line them up. They tend to line up. And the last thing, this is what we call imaginative play. Now, they pretend, make a believe, like they play in a dollhouse, you know, playing a father, a mother, you know, with that imaginative play, playing with animals. Now, they might play, but they have an odd way of playing. They don't have what they call imaginative, creative play. Now, they do have other, like we said, restricted interest. They might be, they might be troubled by certain stimuli, the loud noises and things that upset them. They might seek certain sensory input, so what we call self-stimulating behavior. What are these? Flapping, jumping, spinning. This is all what we call self-stimulating behaviors. They will mention something about the interest in some details of the object. They have odd way of playing, and they have this hand or finger mannerism. And you see some of these children do engage with these, and it makes sense. What are they doing? Why they do it? There's no explanation for it. To them, it makes sense. Now, some of these children, sometimes when I think about autistic children, I've seen that a lot in the movies, that they have exceptional abilities. Yeah. Is that the norm? The answer is no. A lot of these children are mentally retarded, and they have delayed skills in many ways. But there's a small percentage of these children that have special abilities that seems to be amazing. This seems to be more common in boys, and that means about 1 to 10% of autistic children, and it's less common in other disorders. Example of that, they might go to Burj Khalifa in Dubai, and they will look at Burj Khalifa, and they'll tell you how many stories is Burj Khalifa. They might tell you how many windows in that Burj Khalifa by looking at that probably for 2 or 3 minutes, okay? They have exceptional math abilities, adding, like what is how can you calculate like 500 times 1,260? And they'll give you an answer. And some of them have this artistic abilities, like drawing, musical abilities, and some of them learn that. And it sometimes amazes people who work with them or know them. Now, that's not very common, but we do see it.
So before you go on, I think just to summarize some of what you've said in terms of these basic characteristics of autism, which is, really a variety of symptoms. And I think just in repeating what those characteristics are, I think it may help the audience understand why it is a complex diagnosis, and that evidence of one of the symptoms you mentioned it alone isn't sufficient to make a determination that a child is autistic. But the variety of symptoms that exist, they're all related to limitations in communications and in social skills, including abnormalities in play, as well as restricted interests and repetitive behaviors, some of which you've, I think, given very nice examples of. I want to return to one little point that you made. The slide can stay there, which was a point about siblings, because I know that parents are often, can be unsure about, what the chances are if you have one child who is autistic of having a second child who's autistic. And you mentioned that there's a statistic that someone who has one autistic child, there's a small risk of that family or that parent having another autistic child. And I just want to point out that autism is different in every person, and it isn't the case that if you do have a second child with autism, that the symptoms and behaviors that child is demonstrating will be the same as or anything like the first child's autistic symptoms. Correct. And I think as a rule, one general thing to remember is that while there can be similarities in behaviors among autistic people and autistic spectrum disorders, no two cases are alike. They're just always different. And for some people, with autism, they function at a very high level, as you were pointing out, and some people function at a not so high level. And so now I think you want to go on to say a few words about kind of the various levels of functioning across the autism spectrum, and whether one's condition ends up changing over life and how that might happen.
Absolutely correct. I mean, it is when everything you say that when we talk about autism now, in the old days we say autistic disorder, but these days we know a lot more and we call it a spectrum. Okay, so there's a wide range with these children that they have, from the very high functioning to the very low functioning, and that by itself, the way we decide the prognosis for this child, is this child likely to respond well to treatment, to the interventions we do, or they're very likely to respond minimal? And that depends on the level. So by the time these children get to be school aged, they're divided into 3 different types. One is the low functioning with the lower IQ. So, and the lower of the normal IQs is 70, okay? So anywhere from 70 to 110 is considered normal, average range. Anything above that is superior IQ, then very superior IQ. Anything less than 70, they're considered to be mentally retarded, okay? So the level of IQ, if they're smart, they can learn skills, they can advance, they can do much better than a child with a very low functioning, low IQ, let's say less than 50 or less than 40, and they can learn language skills, they can learn social skills, they can learn simple things that we're going to see later, some of the training, but as simple as when you speak to someone, look them in the eye, and this is a learned behavior. So they learn to do all of these things, but their IQ makes a big difference, like how they respond to that treatment. Again, some children with autism show improvement, which is related to good adult outcome. One thing important is a lot of these children need to learn the language. It's important, and you hear this a lot. Early intervention is the key, okay? The early intervention makes a big difference in how this child learns the language, social skills, stop some of the unwanted behaviors, and get treatment, okay? For instance, محمد here had ADHD. He was very hyperactive. And the problem with many of these children, if they're hyperactive, they can't pay attention, they're impulsive, it's very hard to work with them. And I say this to the parents, look, we need to get your child to be calm so they can pay attention, so they can concentrate, so they can learn all the skills they need to learn, okay? That is very important. If a lot of these children, if by age 7 they have not learned the language skills, it's very hard to learn the language skills after the age 7. And I'm talking specifically about autistic children, okay? But in general, as they grow older, regardless what they have, activity level does go down, their overall social skills do tend to improve, self-help, be independent, take care of themselves, change their clothes, brush their teeth, shower, all of that. These are some of the basic skills that many of them don't have, that they learn over time if they receive the appropriate care. And then there's a group of them that tend to be lower function, they might develop seizures. A very important topic here, testing.
We're running out of time.
Okay, I'll speak quickly and I'll say a few words about this. I won't take a lot of time. But is there a test that we could do to diagnose autism? The answer is no, okay? And I'll say no and no and no again. Now, most children, there is not an X-ray, MRI, or testing or blood test that can diagnose the disorder. Now, some of these children might have genetic appearances that might indicate a genetic disorder. For instance, there's something called Rett's syndrome, and it occurs in girls. If they have the certain features, we do the testing for a gene we call MCPE2, and yes, that could be diagnostic. There's something else in boys called Fragile X syndrome. Tall, triangular face, they're hyperactive, they tend to be slightly mentally retarded. We see some of these behaviors. We do the test for Fragile X, and that is diagnostic. Most of the autistic children, we cannot find a reason. Therefore, a lot of these tests are not helpful. So how do we diagnose this? It's the symptoms, the behaviors. And like the same thing with the MRIs and X-rays. So a lot of these children go through, series of tests. None of them could be helpful to make the diagnosis. The basis is the observation, the behaviors. Now, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about treatment, then I'll stop here. But the treatment is the basic things. It doesn't matter what the diagnosis, a lot of times still the family is, what is the child needs? If they can't speak, so they have language delays, they need language, speech therapy. If they need interventions with the behaviors, they need intervention with social skills. So whatever needs they have, we need to focus in that. We need to start early. We need to do it, condensed treatment with that child what they need. There's something called, you will hear a lot in behavior and behavior interventions with autistic children, so applied behavior analysis, or LOVAS is the other name for it. And this is teaching your child how, to stop the negative behaviors, the flapping, the spinning, all the negative ones, and try to teach them positive behaviors. And ABA, applied behavior analysis, is one of the oldest, probably most successful approach to behavior treatment. And there are other things. A lot of these children have other disorders, like we said, ADHD, and we do prescribe medication for it. And if they have self-injurious behavior, we might prescribe antipsychotic medication to stop them from doing that. And then it depends on what other symptoms are present, okay? I'm not going to take time to spend this, but to illustrate what is ABA, I'm going to show you a video here. If we could move to that. Okay. Which is, I believe, is the next slide here. So this will illustrate the point of what applied behavior analysis example is.
This is a very...
Identifying pictures. Objective. Teach the student to identify pictures by pointing. Here's an example.
Point to shirt. Yes, you got it. So smart. All right, wait, hold on. Point to... Give me a hand. Okay, that's good. Point to ball. Oh, excellent. You are super clever. I love it. You're listening. Good.
Identifying pictures. Step 1. Teach the student to identify a single picture. Place one picture card on the table and give the instruction.
Point to shirt.
To help the student respond correctly, immediately guide his hand to point to the picture.
Shirt. That's a shirt. You're wearing a shirt. Good. You got some bubbles.
Over the next several trials, fake your prompt. When the student is able to point independently, give him the most enthusiastic praise and report.
Yeah, that's pointing to shirt. Good.
Over the next several trials, start adding distractors.
Point to shirt.
In this case, the teacher lightly guides the student's arm.
Yay!
responds independently, praise him and give him a reward.
Yes, you got it.
Visit rethinkautism.com to learn more or subscribe now.
Yeah. So as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, this is, ABA is a very common and very successful therapy that children with autism experience. And it actually is one of the initial therapies that Muhammad had. I mentioned to you that he was able to identify his mother and father and his siblings at one point, and then he lost that. And so I just thought, Muhammad, do you want to just say a bit about the therapy he had that was similar to this and how he learned the family members' names and to identify you?
بعد مشينا لقسم المخاطبة في المستشفى، فكان أول حاجة بعد علموا محمد إنه كيف يلتزم يقعد على الطاولة والكرسي. بعدين تواصلوا معه على إنه يعرفوا أعضاء الأسرة، أفراد الأسرة، أمه وأخوانه هنا بالصورة. بعد الصورة الأم، الأبو، الأخوان، بعد شوية أساميهم ده قدروا يتواصل به. محمد يعرف كبداية إنه يعرف أعضاء الأسرة. وبعد ذاك أخذ فترة تاني، بعد خلص المجموعة التانية اتعارف على الاحتياجات الشخصية بتاعته برضو بالصور، عشان إنه يقدر يتواصل يتعلم عليه في خلال اليوم شنو أداؤه بيكون، مثلا دخول، مثلا تبديل ملابسه، اختيار ملابسه، يسميها، كله تم بصور. يعني تطور محمد لغويا بالصورة.
Thank you so much. I think it just, makes all that a bit more real. And in his case, it really started with these family photographs that were brought in, and then he was taught how to identify the family members for that. So you had, I think, a couple of other treatments you wanted to just mention briefly?
Just quickly, I want to talk about this because it's really important, and you hear about this all the time, other treatments. Now, we all know about behavioral treatment, we know about medications, but you hear a lot of this from families, okay? Things like, this is what we call alternative treatment, diet. So a lot of them there's certain diets that can be helpful. It's not the magic treatment. It works with a very small percentage of autistic children. So I want to make, people understand this is not the magic treatment. So diet, for instance, what you hear a lot from practitioners is avoid dairy products, casein, okay? Avoid cereals, gluten. And in some very young children, if this treatment started before age 2, and small percentage of children that you could see a change. See, their behavior is less active. They start to show some improvement in their social behavior. Now, this does not work for everyone. Another one here is the oxygen treatment. That's my favorite here, okay? And I say this, I'm being sarcastic here, but because a lot of people think that the oxygen chamber, and let me just make this very clear. There is no scientific evidence that shows that this hyperbaric oxygen chamber treats autism. People spend tens and tens of thousands on that. There is no one single scientific evidence to show it works. Some families will tell you, yes, we went to certain countries, we've had, and some of the treatments are like 1,000 or 2,000 dirhams per session. And they might experience some changes, okay? But when they come back here, they'll tell you, we're back to where we were, there's not improvement. There are some other things to say, chelation, detoxification, stem cell treatment, that's another favorite. So you hear about all the advertising in some countries, they advertise stem cell treatment for autistic children. It does not work, okay? There's not, again, a single evidence to show that it works for autistic children. It might work for other disorders, okay? Spinal injuries, some other brain injuries, it can work. For autism, it doesn't, not yet. We're not at that stage. It might, in 20, 30 years from now, we might have strong evidence in certain ways to use stem cell to treat autism. It doesn't work now. We don't have any strong evidence to show that it does. And I think that'll be it.
Yeah. Right. So I just want to turn back to Muhammad and ask you to tell us a bit about sort of what Muhammad's like now. Like we've heard, about what he was like as a 1.5-year-old and a 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old, and then he was diagnosed with autism and he received treatment and therapy, and you noticed improvements in his behavior. And so he was diagnosed a little over 7 years ago now, and you've described him to me as a cheerful and playful boy. So can you and who has a lot of energy, I don't want to miss that fact. Can you tell the audience a bit about what he's like at this point at age 10?
بعد اجتهاد كثير ومثابرة محمد الآن الحمد لله يتواصل معنا وهدأ من فرط الحركة اللي كان وزادت اللغوية على الكلمات وحتى وصل مرحلة إنه يركب جملة في كلمتين في جملة. دي أنا بشوفها كويسة جدا. كان في البداية بخاف طبعا لو زيارة الغريب أو طلعنا برا، ولكن الحمد لله هسه حاليا بيخرج عادي، بيلعب في الحديقة، بيجينا مثلا على العائلة داخل البيت زيارات عادي، بسلم. الحمد لله تطور كثير محمد.
If I may ask that question, Muhammad, what do you think the things that helped Muhammad to get better over the years from your perspective, experience as a mother? What parts of the treatment in particular?
بعد زيارة محمد لأخصائي الطب النفسي فصرفت له الأدوية لهدوءه علشان إنه يقدر يتواصل، فأخذ علاجات مهدئة دخلته إنه يقدر يفهمك إنك انتي تتواصلي معاه وتعلميه. فدي بالإضافة إلى إنه خلته كان قلق في النوم أو متوتر، خلته هادي برضو بنوم كطفل عادي، بيستيقظ عادي للمدرسة الصباح والمركز، بيتناول فطوره. صلح كثير محمد الحمد لله.
And I say this because a lot of parents are worried about the use of medications, and some of these medications could make a life difference in these children's how fast they can learn skills, how the whole family's life could change because of that. And would they improve with behavior treatment and speech therapy and everything else? Yes, they would. But and some of these children, I'll be very careful how I phrase my words. With some of these medication, what they can learn without this medication in 1 year, they could probably learn the same skills in 1 month or less with the help of some of these medication. Now, medication is not for all autistic children, but they could make a world of difference in the lives of some of these children. And we just need to keep this in mind. Don't be afraid to give, to try the medication if that was an option by an expert, someone who understands how to treat these children.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious to know, can you tell the audience a bit about how Muhammad's diagnosis has impacted your family? Sort of how did you react when you first received the diagnosis? And what's your family life with Muhammad now? What is it like?
لما عرفنا التشخيص طبعا بالنسبة لنا كان تأثير صعب شوية، ولكن تقبلنا بالصبر وبالمثابرة. أخذ محمد أكثر من وقت أخوانه أو رعايته، بالإضافة لأنه أنا كعائلة كنا بنحب التجوال كثير والسفر، وهذا نحن فترة كافية يمكن 5 سنوات كنا بنسافر في كل فترة بتاعت إجازة، وتوقفنا عن السفر الكثير. خليناه بس نديه فرصة إنه بس في الصيف يطلع يمشي يطلع برا الدولة كتغيير له. ولكن اجتهدت كل الأسرة أخوانه وقفوا بجانب محمد من أي ناحية، يعني يتعاملوا معه. حتى الأخطاء مثلا ما يعني نحن ما استحينا أو خيلنا أو تعقدنا أو لا، بالعكس. حتى يعني اللي بيجي عندنا دايما محمد لما نفتح الباب نخليه هو مثلا يسلم مثلا على نوريه كيف يتواصل كيف. بالإضافة لكده أخذ إنه يعني أكثر من أخوانه أخذ حق في المتابعة وفي
يعطيك العافية.
Which of course is quite common, but I think it's what I've heard from other parents who have children with autism as well as other disorders is that it really has been, of course, it's brought the family together. You used to go out a lot, you used to travel a lot, you've had to cut back on some of that, but it's well worth the sacrifice, and you're really spending a lot more time with your son, which is, what's to be expected. But I know some of you in the audience must have questions.
Well,
so we have
Jenna,
time.
I just want to, if I just take a minute here, you bring a very important point about having an autistic child at the family makes a big difference, and how many families are embarrassed to leave the house because everybody sees that child in public and they think that a badly behaved child. But in fact, not a lot of people understand that or appreciate it. This autistic child, people don't know that. So it does make a big difference in the lives of the family.
Yes.
That's an important point, but yes.
I think we may return to that. We have a final question we're going to pose to Mohammed shortly. She may touch on some of that as well.
She did, yeah.
But I'm just curious to know, are there any questions from the audience? So there are mics being passed around. And you can ask your question in English or Arabic, whichever is your preference.
Hi, my name is Ahmad. Thank you for the talk. My question is regarding using the technology in, how can we leverage technology in dealing with autistic disabilities? And what I mean here is, I lately saw a documentary about an application that was developed to detect gestures on the face and interpret them, whether they are, for example, happy gestures, whether they are, stress. How relevant are they in the autism context? Because we know that, for example, people with autistic disabilities are not responsive to gestures. Would that be relevant using it with them?
Thank you for the question. I would say yes and no. Technology have been used in different ways to treat these children. For instance, we've heard about the facilitated communication, and that's frequently used. So using the technology, the computers to allow these children to communicate. So they might type things to communicate with the others, and this is one way that they could use technology to communicate with the others. But technology can also be used to show these children what does it mean, the different facial expressions, what does it mean, and technology could be used in that sense. So if you have your eyebrows are up, what does it mean? What does it mean when you have your cheeks are up? That means you're smiling. And if you have that, you're frowning. And technology could be used in that sense to teach children concretely what does it mean. So for instance, we teach them concretely, if you speak to someone, you look at them, okay? And it's the same way. If they have that facial expression, that means, or equals happy. This facial expression means angry. This facial expression means sad. And with time, they learn that, and technology could be used in that sense, and can almost become almost spontaneous to some of these children, and they can learn it through technology.
Okay.
What about the other way around? Like if we are using it to detect their feelings, and how they think, so we can get into their brains. And this is what I meant, actually.
Okay. Well, we use it simple ways. I mean, you know, have you seen those faces? Happy face, angry face, and this is one of the things, the use of pictures to help them to express themselves. So that's one way of communication. And I guess technology could be used in that sense. I don't know if I answered your question, but does that?
Yes.
But there's different ways. Did you have anything else in particular that in mind?
My main concern was, how can we get into the autistic brain? Like, how can we understand every gestures that being made by the autistic child?
I think if I knew the answer, I'll be the next winner for the Nobel Prize for medicine. I don't know. I don't think we do have that at this point. I mean, there's many imaging techniques that will show us different ways of how this brain works. Certain parts of the brain then can light up what we call functional MRIs. And Dr. Abdullah هنا we do have experts here in the audience, but there's different parts of the brain that can light up differently with using certain techniques in imaging, functional MRIs they're called, okay? And they can show us how the autistic child brain can work in different ways that sometimes is different than the normal. But does it tell us how the autistic child brain really works? No, I don't think we're at that stage yet.
Okay. Question? Thank you for that question.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
السلام.
أنا الدكتور قيس المقداد، دكتور قيس المقداد من جامعة زايد. أنا أستاذ مشارك في التربية الخاصة والدامجة.
أهلا وسهلا يا دكتور.
طبعا كل الاحترام والتقدير والشكر لمؤسسة سلامة بنت حمدان آل نهيان على الاهتمام بهذا الموضوع، وشكرا للمحاضر الكريم والأستاذة الفاضلة والدة الطفل أحمد محمد. مع كل الود والاحترام بهمني أختلف بأدب مع إحدى الملاحظات اللي ذكرت حول الطفل اللي عنده توحد، إنه بيعاني. طبعا 60% من هؤلاء الأطفال يعانوا من mental retardation أو خلينا نسميها intellectual disability. أنا بعتقد حقيقة إنه ما في دليل، وهذا تم الحديث يعني ذكره الدكتور الكريم، بأنه ما في دليل على قدرتنا على فحص الطفل، على فحص الIQ لطفل عنده توحد. وبالتالي وأنا من خلال خبرتي البسيطة بالتعامل مع الأسر الأطفال اللي عندهم توحد، لما بتسألهم إنه شو رأيكم بابنكم، هل عنده فعلا إعاقة عقلية أو intellectual disability، هو بحد ذاته الطفل عنده توحد، وهذا بكفي بدون ما نحمله تصنيف آخر. أنا بعتقد إنه من أجل هذا كان يعني تسمية السبيكتروم إنه في طيف التوحد، لأنه الطيف هذا بغطي بحدود 18 فئة من الفئات اللي بتدخل اللي بتتشابه بعض السيمتومز عندها مع بعض حتى تمثل هذا الطيف. فأنا يعني بعتقد إنه هذا يعبر عن فشلنا كأخصائيين. اسمح لي بأن أصارح الناس بهذا الفشل اللي أنا بشترك فيه مع كل الأخصائيين، أو عدم مقدرتنا على تحديد فعليا على تحديد سبب لماذا لا يستجيب الطفل اللي عنده توحد حقيقة لبعض الأساليب العلاجية. وبالتالي أنا بعتقد إنه إحنا وهذا بيعكسه التذبذب الواضح في ال3 سنوات الأخيرة بالبريفالنس تبعت الأطفال التوحديين. يعني آخر دراسة أنا كنت بقرأ فيها مؤخرا كانت بتحكي عن طفل من كل 60 طفل، مش من 80 يعني
68.
فهذا بيعكس حقيقة يعني أنه إحنا بحاجة عمل بشكل كبير حتى نحدد الوسائل اللي ممكن نتعرف عليها، وخصوصا بحاجة إنه إحنا ننتبه لدور الأهل كمعرفين بهاي الإيرلي سيمبتومز. أنا بعتذر على الإطالة، وبشكركم جزيل الشكر مرة أخرى على السماح لنا ب يعني المشاركة والمساهمة بهذا الموضوع. شكرا جزيلا.
I'll make one response, and I think Dr. Ahmed may have a response too. Thank you very much for your question and your comments. One thing that what you are illustrating, which is consistent with part of the message we wanted to convey here, is that autism spectrum disorders are very complicated. And what is fortunate, I mean, it's unfortunate that so many children are diagnosed and people have autism. But what is fortunate is there's been a great deal of research, and the amount of new research just in the past 3 or 4 years is, and I think, rather astronomical, in fact. And we're learning new things every day. And the percentages about what percentage of the population have autism, et cetera, I feel like those numbers change constantly, and they change by country, or the indicators are by country. I think, 2 weeks ago in the US, it was 1 out of every 45 children. So I think that it's not I think the science that goes into that is rigid, but I think that the situation is constantly in flux because of different ways that autism is defined and different techniques for diagnosing children, and that being different in different countries, et cetera. And so I don't want us to focus too much on whether it's 1 out of 80, 1 out of 60, 1 out of 40. It's a rather alarming number regardless. And our point here today was to really point out, to make the audience more aware of what autism spectrum disorders are, and mainly that it's really, they're a part of a larger set of developmental disorders that children have that do have indications at a very young age, and that there are symptoms, that it really is, I think it's important for parents and parents-to-be to really educate themselves about early childhood development, the stages of development, the milestones, what to expect at different stages, and not to become overly alarmed if your child isn't doing something that's on a particular chart that comes from a reputable medical association. But if they aren't doing those behaviors at a certain age, not to become alarmist about it, but to take note of that and to see a professional. I think especially if you see more than one of those indicators. And so I think scientists in the field, they're arguing this. People have different opinions about what the causes are, what the best treatments are, and so we don't want to get into that discussion here today. But I do want Dr. Ahmad to respond more directly to some of the comments, and he has some further comments he wants to make in closing as well.
I do want to thank Dr. Faisal for the comments. I think we see different opinions. That speaks to the fact that we don't really understand the disorder very well yet. We know a lot about it. I don't think we know enough to say we know how to treat it. Up to this point, there is not a single medication in the market that says this is a treatment for autism, okay? So what we have is we have medications that says this is for behavior problems that we see in autism, okay? This is a medication for ADHD, which we see very commonly in autistic children, and so on and so forth. But something very important, I mean, how can we tell that these children are mentally retarded? Well, their abilities. The scales we have right now that can measure their abilities, their intelligence, tell us that there's 2/3 of these children are mentally retarded. Now, this is what we have available now to measure their abilities, their intelligence. We have no other way of measuring it. Now, like I mentioned earlier, some of these children have special abilities. Like I mentioned, some of the child will look at Burj Khalifa and will tell you there is 25,626 windows in Burj Khalifa. They can calculate 2,667 times 3,120, and they will tell you an answer in 10 seconds. there's no explanation for it. But it tells us that they have scattered ability of intelligence that these children have in certain areas, and they don't have it in other areas. They're severely really delayed in some other areas. So, I mean, this is the available means that we have now to measure these children's abilities. We might have them in the future. If you know anything else, please let us know.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience, and then we want to hear some final comments from Muhammad. Or maybe.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for this nice overview. Muhammad, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. I still have an old question in my mind when I was a medical student and as a resident, that always, not always, but few parents will come to you arguing that there is a relationship between vaccines and autism, a relationship between vaccine and autism. Okay. I just wonder, is this question does still exist?
Yeah.
Do you hear some parents, you know, or few parents that argue about this? The reason why, because you know that the only way to protect our kids is by having early vaccines, all right? And I was really resistant or hesitant to raise this question, but I'm here trying to deliver a message, you know, after your comment that, you know, vaccine is.
Thank you.
Something
Okay.
else.
Do you want to?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Dr. Abdullah is a colleague. Those of you who know Dr. Abdullah is an expert physician, and the question is an expert question, I would say. But yes, there's been a controversy in the field since exactly 1999. A physician, an English physician named Andrew Wakefield, did this study, and he was a gastroenterologist, and came up with, to make the long story short, he came up with conclusions that vaccines have something to do with autism. In other words, they caused autism. He came up with many other findings, that there's toxins that enter the child's intestines that also contribute to autism. Now, many of these findings were later discredited, okay? He actually lost his license. But what happened after, and both in the US and the UK after this, Andrew Wakefield, look him up on the internet. But this caused, you know, waves of uncertainty in the field. And many of these findings were discredited over years, but this has been going around since 1999. He's still there, he's still out there saying vaccines caused it. Now, what came after that is a certain preservative in the vaccine that's called thimerosal, which is the mercury component, which is an excellent preservative in the vaccines, used for the vaccines, in particular the MMR, the one we commonly give in this country at age 15 months, thought it caused the autism, okay, or caused some of the symptoms of autism. Now, that caused panic. And there's a lot of celebrity were marching to say, don't give your child vaccines. And that is wrong. That caused a lot of problems. And what happened is many people stopped doing that. Now, this is what happened. So a lot of people stopped giving their children the vaccines. Drug companies who manufacture the vaccines stopped using that component, the mercury, thimerosal, in the vaccines. Now, they've done studies before that, and they've done studies 15 years later. What do you think happened? You would expect the autism rates to go down, right?
Gone up.
Continue to go up, and it's much more higher than it used to be.
Yeah.
Now, what does that tell us? Okay, so I don't think that's really good evidence to support that. Now, that we have seen, having said that, we've seen very rare cases where vaccines were given, the child develops clear symptoms of fever, rigidity, they might have seizures, they have clear neurological symptoms after giving the vaccine, and some of these cases develop autism-like symptoms later. Now, how often is that? Very, very rare. Is that enough to justify not giving the vaccine and all the problems that can happen from not giving the vaccine? Absolutely not, okay? So we have to be really very careful. Vaccines do not cause autism. If you don't give your child the vaccine, that cause a host of other problems to your child. So it is a big controversy in the field and has been around for more than 15 years now.
Thank you so much
Dr.
for
Abdullah,
clarifying
please.
that.
May the
So we-
time allow to one question to the
If
moderator?
it can be a quick one, I know there were two other questions, and if they could be quick, we can do them, but we do need to wind up. We've
Very
gone
quick.
quite far over time.
Very quick. Muhammad, did you get any support from parents with diagnosed kid with autism? And what about like societies here in the UAE that look after autistic children? I just wonder if there was any resources available for you as a parent.
بالنسبة للمؤسسات الطبية مثلا ولا المؤسسات التعليمية ولا بالنسبة للدعم حصلناه من المستشفى. أما مؤسسات تعليمية فلا، هي ما في يعني دعم تعليمي للطفل بس. مش تقصد كده؟ نعم. كان في المرحلة بتاعت محمد بداية المرض وكان يبلغ العمر مثلا 3 سنوات، فكان مركز واحد بالنسبة للوافدين، مركز واحد بتاع توحد، فكان يعني عليه زحمة كثيرة مثلا كده. ولكن في مراكز أخرى فبيكون مثلا شاملة للإعاقات كلها، ولكن بيكون في صف مثلا متخصص للتوحد فقط. ولكن حاليا لما المؤسسات التعليمية كترت فدايما بيفضلوا الطفل الصغير العمر. ولكن محمد يعني الحمد لله في المركز اللي هو فيه يعني جد استفاد.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hello. I just want to introduce myself. Thank you so much for this amazing lecture. My name is Sharifa Yatim. I'm board certified behavior analyst. I'm a specialist in ABA in applied behavior analysis. Thank you so much for pointing that out, Dr. Ahmed, regarding that ABA is the only effective evidence-based treatment for autism. And thank you so much for raising that, because I also want to add to that, saying that because ABA now is becoming more and more a treatment-based for scientific evidence-based treatment for autism, my concern here as an Emirati local is that there is no specialist program or a major or a master's program for people to specialize in that area. So for example, I went abroad to study this and came back, and in order for me to practice this with our families. But due to the low amount of speciality here in the UAE especially, people now are referring to non-specialist people that they call or claim themselves as behavior analysts from a workshop or two. And so I would like to take this opportunity to enlighten families and professionals that we should be looking for certified behavior analysts that do have their certification and they do went through the courses and modules for ABA. But hopefully in the upcoming future, I would like to see a university, maybe in Zayed University, to kind of bring more specialists in this field and have it more kind of regulated and licensed in the country, since ABA now is more the mainstream for treatment of autism, and we're going to the right direction.
Right.
So just wanted to raise that, and thank you so much for this lecture. Thank
Sharifa,
you.
right?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to my, to my lecture, hopefully.
You have my full support. You absolutely do.
Yeah.
By the way, Sharifa is holding a workshop in the conference. This is the upcoming conference. We have the world top experts coming, the world top experts, American Academy for Child Adolescent Psychiatry, the Maudsley Clinic, University of Chicago. We have a lot of local experts, including our colleague here, Sharifa, who will be holding workshops and lectures in this conference. Please come. I think you will learn a lot from this conference.
Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that.
Thank you very much, Sharifa. So we have one more question we're going to take from the back there. Okay.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أود أشكركم على تقديم هالمحاضرة. أنا كمعلمة رياض أطفال وجيت عشان أقطع الشك في اليقين. عندي طفل كنت أشك دائما أنه هو عنده توحد، فلما جيت اكتشفت أن 80% من الأعراض اللي أنت قلتوها كانت موجودة في الطفل. فأريد أسأل دوري كمعلمة كيف أوصل الفكرة لأولياء الأمور أو أهله أنهم يتقبلون الموضوع بشكل سلس، وكيف دوري كمعلمة في الصف أن أخليه يقدر يتواصل مع الأطفال ويتعلم أكثر ويندمج مع الأطفال الباقين. شكرا.
So I think I'll ask Dr. Ahmad to respond to that quickly. And both of our guests are going to they'll be able to stay around for just a little bit longer, and they can answer more questions you have and perhaps answer your question more fully. But if you want to give a short answer to that, then we can wrap up the formal
Yeah,
part of the
I'll
session.
respond briefly. شكرا جزيلا للسؤال يا أختي. أولاً. I will be available afterwards if you have more questions for me, and you can certainly visit the society website, which has a lot of information and articles about autism and other childhood disorders. But it is important to work with the families, accepting the child. Just because you have your child on the autism spectrum does not mean he's dead. I see this a lot. Your child can improve, can do better. I see professionals here from the field that will tell you the same. The child can, if you do early interventions, that can make a big difference. If you seek the treatment early on, take him to the appropriate professionals, that could make a world of difference in the child's life and learning skills. And it is important and there's a lot we can do. Just because your child you've been told that he has on the autism spectrum, it doesn't mean he's dead. And many of these children, being crossed and considered dead, but we come back later to find out they're doing so wonderful, and they do things that normal adults can't do. It's really important, focus on your child. And there's books and there's some wonderful literature to show some of the mothers who cared about the children progressed to do so well, and some of them have written books, and I can tell you later, but I can look at that information on the website. But there's a wealth of information about how well these children did over time with treatment.
Thank you very much. And again, if you want to speak with the doctor afterwards about that in more detail, you can. I want to point out, one of the decisions we had to make in developing this session is to figure out how to limit it. And we couldn't cover all there is to cover about autism, obviously. But we really wanted to focus on kind of these early signs and getting people to be more aware of what to look for. We didn't have the opportunity or the time to really focus on, what the prognoses are and how children behave later and what their life outcomes might be, et cetera, which could be the topic for another session. So we really wanted to focus on, making you aware of what to look for, what is normal development, what's kind of more odd development. And again, that message, definitely seek professional help. As we think about closing, I want to turn back to Muhammad and ask us if she would say a few words to you about, what it's like to have a child with autism, kind of as her parting words to the audience this evening.
عيد السؤال تاني معلش. عيد السؤال.
Can you tell the audience kind of what it's like to have a child with autism? Kind of what are your messages for them to take home with them in terms of, how you've dealt with it, how to deal with it?
في الحقيقة يعني أنا بقول لكل عندها شاكة في البداية عندها الطفل إنه هو توحدي ولا لا، إن ما تأخر الزمن يعني أكثر من 2.5 أو 2 تمشي للاستشاريين عشان يفيدوها وتتوصل كل ما كان مبكر زي ما ذكروا الخصائص يكون أحسن. بالإضافة إلى كده لا بد من الصبر والمثابرة، يعني موضوع ما سهل، عايز صبر، صبورة، عايز مثابرة، عايز اجتهاد كتير، عايز وقت تقضيه مع ابنك عشان ما يعني تقدر تدخليه في العالم بتاعك انت اللي هو بالتواصل، اعتماد على النفس على الذات دي مهمة جدا. أول حاجة بالذات لأنه لما يفوت عمر 5 سنوات يفترض إنه بعد ده خلاص يكون اعتمد على نفسه في كل مهارات الحياة اليومية، بما فيها كلها، بما فيها حتى الكلمات، الطلب، التصرفات، أي شيء. وبقول لهم إنه يعني ما تستحوا، ما تخجلوا، اطلعوا للعالم الخارجي بولدكم أو ببنتكم، خلوهم يعيشوا مع الأطفال، أشرحوا. بعض الأولياء الأمور ما بيتفهموا، بيعتبروا هذا يعني لأنه أطفال التوحد يعني أشكالهم صراحة ما كله يعني ما بتديك انتباه إنهم ما طبيعيين إلا لما يصدروا حركات منهم. فالبعض منهم من المجتمع الخارجي بيعتبروا مثلا إنه ولد مثلا ما مربى لو تصرف غلط، ولكن أنت ما تحرجي، أشرحي لهم بيتفهموا الوضع، وعشان تقدري إنك يعني تطلعي ابنك يعني يقدر هو ذات نفسه يتواصل، وفي يوم من الأيام يعني حيصل عمر يعتمد على نفسه. فهم لهم زي ما ذكروا الأخصائيين عندهم قدرات، يعني قدرات، فيهم الفنانين وفيهم الرسامين والعزف كثير جدا. فأنا يعني المسألة في النهاية صبر، زي ما بقول لك، صبر وعزيمة. شكرا.
Thank you so much. I think it's, her love for her son is obvious in how she speaks of him, and the ways in which the family has really come together to work collectively to ensure he's received the support and therapy, and just plain good old-fashioned love that every child needs. So thank you very much for your impassioned statements and for your willingness to come and speak in front of this big audience about your experience with your son Muhammad. And thank you also, Dr. Ahmad, for coming and giving your professional expertise and sharing your experiences as a physician working with children who have autism and their families.